Hello, day drinkers. Welcome to Day Drinking with Author slurred right through that. Day Drinking with Authors, the interview series where I pick a book, the author picks a drink, and we discuss both. I'm your host, Molly Fader, Molly O'Keefe, and my guest tonight is Brooke Lea, Brooke Lea Foster. It was the three names, and for a second there, for a second there, she was going to be Lee Brooke Foster, and that's not her name. Brooke Lea Foster. And we're here to talk about her second book, On Gin Lane. And if you are really absolutely fascinated by how the rich and famous used to vacation in like the 1950s in a way that manages to be both like soapy and heartbreaking at the same time, then these books are for you. They're delightful. You go in thinking you're going to get a beach read, and then it turns into something else in the best possible way. I'm going to read the back copy because my mother likes that, and Mom, you would love this book. So get your book club on it. So On Gin Lane. After her fiance whisks her off to the glistening shores of Southampton in June of 1957, one young socialite begins to realize that her glamorous summer is giving her everything except what she really wants in this new novel from the author of Summer Darlings. Everly Lee Farrows thinks she finally has life all figured out, a handsome fiance named Roland, a trust in her name, and a house in Bronxville waiting for her to fill it up with three adorable children. That is until Roland brings her out to the Hamptons for a summer that will change everything. Most women could only dream of the engagement present Roland unexpectedly bestows on Lee, a beachside hotel on the prized Gin Lane. But Lee's delight is clouded by unpleasant memories of another hotel, the Plaza, where she grew up in the shadow of her mother's mental illness. Shaking off flashbacks, Lee resolves to dive into an unforgettable summer with poolside Bellinis, daily tennis matches, luncheons with her Manhattan Circle, and her beloved camera in tow. But when tragedy strikes on the hotel's opening weekend, the cracks in Lee's picture-perfect future slowly begin to reveal themselves, and Lee must look deep within herself to determine if the life she's always wanted will ever truly be enough. From the regal inns to the farmland, the well-heeled New Yorkers to the bohemian artists, the East End of Long Island is a hodgepodge of the changing American landscape in the late 1950s, and the perfect place for Lee to discover who she really is. And all of that happens. All of that and more. Let's bring in Brooke. Hi, Brooke.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm so sorry. I had like a real moment there where I was like, oh, what have I done?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking like we drank a little too much before we got started for a second.
So the drink was a gin and tonic, but then at the beginning of the book, Roland mentions to Everly, like as like a way to like pitch her on what this vacation is going to be, a drink that I actually couldn't find the name again, but it's vodka, rum, mint, and lime.
Right. It's kind of modeled on the South Side, which is a drink that they drink out in the Hamptons, but that's not what they call it. I'm blanking. Oh, Palomas, right? Palomas. We'll drink Palomas. No, it wasn't.
Has tequila in it. Well, anyway, that's what I'm drinking, and that could explain a lot of things and I had to put soda in it because who doesn't love a rum drink cut with vodka?
That's so funny that you kind of changed yours up because I changed mine to more of a lime Ricky, which is like more of a summer version of a gin and tonic. So it has seltzer in it, and it also has a lot of lime juice, and then it does have the gin. But I made it a little bit on the lighter side just so I, keep it together.
Keep it together.
Well, it's already so refreshing. I highly recommend this drink as soon as it's warm outside. It's so nice.
It is a nice one. It's funny and I mean, we'll talk about this, but I've read a couple of books set in the 1950s, and a real theme is drinking, like
drinking and smoking. I mean, they didn't stop. I know. And it's crazy because you would think I was such a heavy drinker because my characters in both of my books, they drink nonstop. Like they always have this like delightful cocktail in hand, but that's really what life was like out there. So, I mean, in the Hamptons, especially in this glamorous summer community, people got on the train from Manhattan. They had their servants meet them at the train with like in their car and drive them to the grand house with the, rolling lawn. And the first thing they do is sit down and have an amazing cocktail, right? Like to enjoy the view.
I think it also, and we'll get into it, it speaks a little bit to the amount of unhappiness. Like that sounds delightful to me, but in a lot of these stories, you could really get a sense that they're drinking in the way to mask some of the, like, it's a social game. It's part of the like there's almost not a choice about it in
Yes,
some
and I
ways.
think when these particular characters, so Everly is my heroine, and when she and her fiance first arrive out there, like he's ready to join every social club in town, and he does. He joins the Meadow Club, which is still in Southampton, where they have these beautiful grass tennis courts, and they join the exclusive Southampton Bathing Court, which they, everybody out there calls the Beach Club, but the people that go to that are like, stratospheric people we don't touch, right? Like no one can get in there, but they get in. And then they're going to Shinnecock golfing. Well, she wasn't, because women, I don't think, were allowed there back then, but he was. So, like, she's like, I'm exhausted. She literally says to him in the first chapter or second chapter, I'm exhausted just thinking about this summer. Like, I thought we were going to relax. But
Right.
so, yeah, I think the drinking took the edge off. I mean, every place that they go, there's a lot of social pressures, and especially on Everly to be exactly who she's expected to be. She's she was a former debutante who was previously engaged, and that fell apart. And there's a lot of pressure on her to get married and have kids and live this very traditional life, which was on a lot of women back then. So the drink soothes some of the malcontents.
Right. And you get the sense that, particularly at the beginning, and I'm skipping ahead a bit, but
Yeah,
in my locked down list of questions, but you get the sense a bit that she really believed the hard part was getting married, like, or getting this guy, right? You set it up so perfectly. And I like, so the opening of the book is her actually going to a matchmaker that her family had used before. She's been dropped by this fiance. There are some rumors circulating, but she's like, find someone, please, like find someone. And then she happened, like it all works out in sort of a romantic way. And you get this sense that she's like, well, I've done the hard thing. I am just now going to be a wife, and it's very easy from here on out. And watching her, I mean, other things happen that make it harder, but watching her realize, oh, this isn't the end, this is the beginning, is painful and beautiful to watch or
yeah,
read.
thank you. I mean, I do think that when she gets to Southampton with her fiance, she thinks that they're going to have this bright future together, this amazing summer, glittery, right? He convinces her because she's a little hesitant at first. But then I think once they're living together, the reality of what married life looks like really hits her. I mean, she
Mhm.
finds herself cleaning up after him, right? She
Yeah.
finds herself cooking for him. She doesn't even know how to cook. She had a cook at her house, her apartment in the plaza, her family's house. But then she realizes maybe there's more that she wants. Maybe
Mhm.
she says to herself, maybe there's more to life than just picking up after Roland, right? Or dreaming Roland's dreams, because
Dream. Yeah.
Roland, it's his dream to own this hotel and to live this glittery Hamptons life, but it's not hers,
Right.
even though she grew up with it. But she kind of inherits that dream from him. And about halfway through the summer, or early on in the summer, she has a little gnawing question in her that says, maybe there's something out there for me. And she goes after it. And I think at the heart, this book to me is really about a woman finding her creative self, getting in touch with her creative life and that artist voice inside of her that she's been ignoring for so long. I
Right.
mean, I think this is something all of us go through who are creative types. I mean, I know I certainly have, but back then it was even harder, right? Because women weren't artists, women weren't photographers. Like,
And certainly not wealthy women I mean, that's what
exactly.
was like. I mean, this is your second book set in the 1950s among the sort of wealthy vacation set. And I
Love
was
it.
wondering, like,
I love it.
what draws you to it? I mean, I will read these books every day. There is something so soapy and delightful and historical about it. But what draws you to that time period and that set of that world?
It's such a good question. So I grew up out on Eastern Long Island, not that far from the Hamptons. My family they were locals in Montauk, which, if you know anything about the Hamptons, or if you don't, the very easternmost tip of the long part of the Hamptons of Long Island. I don't know why I'm doing this with my fingers so much. Is Montauk. So I grew up as a local out there, and I found that watching the city people come and go and interacting on a limited basis, going out to Montauk and being with my family who were locals, who were fishermen. Beach towns are fascinating microcosms of class. So there's the haves and there's the have-nots in every single beach town in this country and probably the world. There's the people that live in the gorgeous houses and the people that drive up to those houses to serve those people.
Right.
And that tension has always fascinated me. And I think it's just from living like with my foot in the Hamptons, right? Like watching it all unfold in front of me. When you drive through the Hamptons, it's these tidy streets with these grand, like I said, grand lawns and picture perfect yards, tight hedgerows. You can't even see anything but the roofs of some of these grand estates. And the light is so beautiful in the ocean. It's like you get so sucked into it. But most people that are there don't have the wealth of the 1% that own these houses, but just walking through the streets and watching the way the women were lunching. I don't know. It's just something that's always fascinated me as a little bit of an outsider looking in a place where I grew up. Right. It's strange.
Right.
You know?
That is a very specific perspective that you have.
Yes.
Right. Like that is just not a lot of people have that kind of perspective. So then what is it about the 1950s?
So it's such a good question.
Is it the swimsuits?
The fashion alone, right? Like the sweater sets with like the pillbox hat and the matching flats, the Converse. I mean, they dressed so beautifully. So I hate talking about how glamorous women were then because they were pretty miserable, right? So I feel like I'm kind of being a little unfair to women at that time to call them glamorous. Because I think if I sat down with a lot of women who raised kids at that time, they were turning to the, Lion Rickies, the gin and tonics in the afternoon, including my grandmother. But there is something to be said for that time period. Women who were in the 40s, they were in war, it was wartime. They weren't in war. A lot of them worked in jobs. They had to wear these like very thick fabrics that were just like mass produced. They wore Bakelite jewelry. Like it was in the 50s that women kind of got back to their femininity and they could wear these like more feminine cuts and these beautiful satins and silks again and polka dots, and fashion just became so fun, right? So that kind of gets me. My grandmother was also a dancer and she was very elegant, and she would walk around and even when I was in my 20s and say, "Hey doll, how's your bow?" And it was just how she spoke. It was just the way she interacted with the world. And all of her button up white shirts on the beach were tied at the navel, like even in her 70s. Like it's just who she was. And she carried a glamour that just stuck with me. I loved laying next to her in a lounge chair, at the pool and just hearing about her days. And I think her voice stayed with me and just always got me very interested in that time period. And then in kind of a light way, I can say that I was a kid that loved Grease. Like I loved historical. I just did. Like I was dancing to Grease like from the time I was like 8 years old, So like I just love that time period for some reason. The music, the clothes, the culture, the drinks, all of that it's always fascinated me.
And I feel like that is something that is so well conveyed in this book and in Summer Darlings, which is like you have this world that you really love. Like your affection for it, your enthusiasm for it is all visible on the page, but it's also a time of incredible upheaval and like women's rights battles on the main stage and in homes. Like it is such a, it said it in your back cover copy, right? Like the struggle for independence, it is all really happening real time in these books. And I was wondering, why do you think I'm not giving you a prep for this, and I actually am just thinking of it myself. So if you have to say, let's go back to that. Do you have a feeling why this is suddenly such a popular period of time like we're finding a lot more books set in the 50s, early 60s than I feel like I have ever seen?
Really? I'm trying to think. I just feel like the Kennedy, the Camelot era, it seemed simpler. I think women want to have it all, so they want to have that housewife experience but still be out working. I don't know. I don't have a good insight on that, but I do think that one of the reasons why I love to write about this time period, and as writers, I think we write in sometimes to rewrite history. And so
Uh,
my characters don't adhere to what was going on at that time. They don't follow the rules. I love girls that don't follow the rules,
right.
probably because I'm such a rule follower. But like, but I love Everly because my main character, because she's prescribed this entire life, but she has the courage to step out of that and say,
Yeah.
I want something else. And like I said earlier, really follow this passion she has for photography. I mean, there's a point in the book, it's actually probably one of my favorite scenes in the whole novel, where she goes to visit with this Annie Leibovitz type photographer. And she has no business as this rich, like, debutante showing up with this artists community in Bridgehampton and saying, I want to learn, but she just feels so desperate to make her mark and find herself. And she goes, and the scene between them is just so fun for me to reread. Even though I wrote it, it sounds silly, but I just love their interaction, because the photographer Starling is looking at her like she's a little bit from outer space, like, what are you doing
Yeah.
here? And Everly's like, you know what, don't write me off, because I'm rich. Like, I'm still a woman who's like gunning to make something of herself just like you did. And she kind of forces the photographer to take her seriously, and she does.
Yeah, she
So
takes off her jewelry. Like, she
yeah,
notices Starling, like, look at this jewelry, and she's like, if I take this off, I'm just a woman. It was a great scene. And Starling the whole time is eating noodles out of a thermos. And I thought, like it was, I think a lot about how authors introduce secondary characters and how, like, you have so little time to make a first impression. Like, you really have to nail it. And I feel like that thermos with noodles, really, for whatever
did it.
reason, like, there she was. There she was sitting there with her glass. Yeah, judgment. Yeah.
Yeah, totally, totally.
So
But
one
she really, I feel like Starling really encourages, she helps Everly find her way. Oh, whether it's away from Roland, which she does. I mean, not to like spoil the book, but she does. It is a I am woman, hear me roar story. There is
Mhm.
a happy ending, I would say, for Everly in the romance department, but it
Oh, for
really is
sure.
about a woman's finding her voice and finding her place in society. And I think that's the fun of it, right? We get
Yeah.
to rewrite that.
Yeah. It's not so fun if it doesn't work out, really.
Well, true.
I mean, there's
That's
a
the
lot
beauty
of
of
those books
writing.
too.
I
But
know. Well, it doesn't work out for everyone in the book.
yeah.
So,
One
yeah.
of the things I love about the book too is the blend of real people and characters. So
Oh, so
like
fun.
Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller walk into this party. And I mean, that's part of the Hamptons of that time, right?
Yes, absolutely. So the Hamptons back then were, I mean, there was like Diana Vreeland, the editor of Vogue, was always out there. We had Jackson Pollock painting out there, his wife, Grace Hartigan, making the rounds. I mean, it was like William Chase Merritt, I think is his name, Jasper John. I mean, Truman Capote would be sitting at Bobby Van's, which is a restaurant in Bridgehampton. He lived in a potato farm out there. The Hamptons, it's really interesting because I'm sure people, whether they've been to the Hamptons or not, have some real assumptions about what it looks like there, and most of it's probably right. Right? There's a lot of McMansions now, but they're all done with beautiful cedar shingles. I mean, everything is done to the T beauty. I mean, it's not like, it's gorgeous. But I think back then it was different, and that's partly why I wanted to write this book, because my family would always talk about how it used to be so artsy and
Yeah.
bohemian, and I'd be like, really? I don't know about that. But the summer colony was only one of the part of the population out there. Like the light out there really captures the imagination of so many artists and writers, and they were really out there in the summer doing their work and making their mark. And I think, yeah, I just think being in that bohemian world and being at the like beach party with these people and watching them paint, and I mean, some of that is still there. You can go to Jackson Pollock's house and kind of reflect back on it.
The
But
poor artists aren't renting a house for the summer because of
I
the
mean,
light.
you can't afford it. It's
Yeah.
$40,000 a week. I mean, I can't even stay in a hotel there in summer. It's crazy. It's really become untouchable. So,
The potato farms were like an excellent detail. I had no idea.
okay, so the potato farms, not only were they there, but when I was interviewing some of the local editors and historians out there, what I didn't realize, there's one kind of main thoroughfare that clogs up through summer, right? Like it could take a drive that takes 15 minutes can end up taking an hour, like most beach towns, right? But it used to be okay. So when you're on that main thoroughfare, which is called 27 East, right now you would see like a Carvel, you'll see shops, you'll see boutiques, you'll go through small towns, and then you'll go through some farm fields, you'll see a vineyard or two, and you see houses. You never see the water. You never see the water. To get to the ocean, you have to go like 2 miles down any of the roads from that main road.
Wow.
Back then, you could see ocean because
All
there was nothing but potato fields. And that detail to me hit me so hard because I just can't imagine the wonder of that. Seeing
yeah.
all that open land out there, how beautiful it must have been to be able to see down to the sparkling ocean through the potato fields, like amazing.
So when you're writing the real people and the characters, like do you feel the line where you're like, I can have this scene with Marilyn Monroe and I can have Marilyn Monroe say a couple of things, but like there's a line where you can't put any more of the real people without it somehow taking over or without like, so much more extra research. Like,
Yeah, it's a really fine line. I was very nervous about okay, so partly why I chose the summer of 1957 is because Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller that they famously spent the summer out in the Hamptons, and it was just such a unique time. It was a very specific time in their lives, and I have no idea why I'm just so obsessed with them, but I always have been, and so I really wanted it to be that summer. So I knew they were going to be in the book. And as soon as I was writing the grand opening scene, I knew that Marilyn Monroe would say something to her and it would be this pivotal moment. But I also knew that it could crash and burn so easily, right? Like I was terrified because I'm thinking, how do I put words in Marilyn Monroe and Arthur
yeah,
Miller's mouths, right? So it was definitely something that I labored over. But what I did was I definitely looked at a lot of pictures of them. I kind of like read interviews with them. I knew that if they showed up, they would be super cool and reserved. They would, they wouldn't be like
right.
super chatty or anything. And I also had this sense that she would say something like that, so Marilyn Monroe leans over to Everly, who has a camera around her neck and is taking pictures, and she says, get yourself a job and no one can boss you around, kind of an idea.
Yeah.
Like your passion should be your job. And it's a pretty simple line, but I do believe that Marilyn Monroe is much smarter than people give her credit for. And I did think that that was within the reality
Oh,
of some
totally.
so I kind of just tried to keep it as simple because you're right. If I would have gotten into a long conversation, I mean, you would have lost the reader because people would be like, she wouldn't say that. She wouldn't act like this, right?
Or
She's very
you'd start researching. Like I did abandon the book to go, when did, but
yeah.
I felt like that line that you walked so well. And I also think because you had those interactions and those real people there, a character like Starling is like, I mean, I was like, is Starling real?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it lends such authenticity to, the lady with the thermos and the noodles.
Oh, that's so great to hear. I mean, she's definitely my favorite. I adore her. Yeah, and then there are other people in the book who are real, like the restaurateur, Herb
Mhm.
McCarthy. He was a real restaurateur out in Southampton who really was somebody who was, always gossiping and always spreading the word, and people adored him and clamored to get into his restaurant. He was a former Brooklyn law grad. So there are other real people. I just think it's fun for readers to include some real people in a book. I think it's a very, like you said, you have to walk the line really carefully. But I do think, like, I almost wanted to have Grace Hartigan, the painter in the show up in the book, Jackson Pollock's wife, but I just knew I couldn't. I had to pull myself back. But I love having these real people as touchstones in the
Yeah.
book because I do think it helps the reader orient themselves and figure out exactly where they are in time very quickly without having to do a document dump or a fact dump, whatever we
Right.
call it in writing, right? So there can be sneaky ways that we bring the time period in and make it feel real to people. And to me, Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe did that immediately, right? Like you
Totally.
know where you are in time if they're
Totally.
at that
It's
party.
so true. So one of the, I mean, we're going to talk briefly about Roland and you, it's interesting. I mean, it's not a spoiler. I mean, Roland arrives on the page like a white knight, but it very quickly starts to turn. Like there becomes a sense of doom about him. And as I was reading it, and I mean, I'm sure you have too. I have read so many historical novels set in this time period or any time period before, where the point is to get married, the point is to have a husband, and the author will turn themselves inside out to reveal one characteristic that will make us like this hero, so that we'll believe that this heroine is in some kind of romantic feeling, has some kind of romantic feeling for this hero. And no matter how much they bend themselves inside out, you're like, that guy's a jerk. This is not going to go well. And I realized reading this that you did this very smart thing where you put it all on her. Like, you made us believe that she saw his faults, and it didn't necessarily matter. She was swept up in love, thinking she wasn't going to get it, but that the point was to be married. And I thought that cleared the way for you. And I wondered, was that in the first draft? Like, did you think of that initially, or as I'm saying this, you're like, is that what I did?
I know. I'm like, this is very interesting to me.
Like, I mean, it just felt like you got to point A to A, from A to B quicker, because you made us believe her, not him. Like,
Well,
you know
I
what I
think
mean?
she's willing to accept less from him because she's so desperate to be in this relationship because the first one fails. So when she's engaged to this guy George Sheets before, things go really poorly, and the engagement is broken off, and her parents are devastated, and her mom has all these mental health issues, so it just weighs on her and weighs on her and weighs on her. So when she finds this man who on paper any of us would go bananas for, right? Like, oh my gosh, he's a Whitaker, which is basically a Ford. His family owns an automobile empire, and he's dashing, and he's charming, and he's all of these things that on first look, it's like what you're saying, like we're all like, okay, yeah, I get it.
He
But
lets
I
her
think,
drive his car too fast.
yes, right, exactly. On Sunrise Highway out to the Hamptons from the city. I mean, it's really fun. But he does have a lot of flaws, and they come out early. But I think what you're saying is she forgives them. And so is that what you mean? Like we're watching her kind of overlook them.
Yeah, you do not have to convince the reader that that he is something he's not, because she sees, or we see her so clearly. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, we understand why she's doing this. Even when he gifts her this hotel, she has nothing but bad feelings about growing up in a hotel, and he gifts her this hotel, and her initial instinct is clearly like, fuck no.
I know, exactly. Exactly. Well, I am so grateful hearing you talk like this because, as writers, we struggle with motivation, right? We have to have our characters' motivations down so clearly. So now that I'm thinking of this in terms of a motivation, it was not there in the first draft as clearly as it is. That's something that every draft it chiseled closer and closer to getting to that point where we understood exactly why she was accepting him the way he was, why she would forgive him these faults, and why she even agrees to stay with him
Yeah.
out at the hotel. Because in the beginning, this all happens in the first chapter, so there's no spoiler alert here, but he whisks her out to this hotel for a weekend getaway and then says, hey, guess what? We're staying the whole summer. And she's thinking, what? She has these horrible memories of growing up in a hotel in New York City, the Plaza, mostly because of her mom's mental health struggles. And she doesn't want to be judged by the staff. And she doesn't want to be like pictures being taken. She just doesn't want to be in that world. She wants a quieter life away from all of that. And he kind of suspects it, but doesn't care.
Yeah.
And we watch that pain in the first paragraph. The first chapter, right? Like we see her really wanting to say no, but she can't. She's stuck in that position of saying yes. And then she makes the best of it, which is like what we do as women, right? We figure out how to make the best of it until all of a sudden she just can't anymore.
Yeah.
So
you have two very heartbreaking moments, or that were heartbreaking to me. So you create this sort of pocket of time. So he's whisked her away. This tragedy happens. and she's there kind of alone with him. The plan is over. Like there is no hotel to
Yeah,
now
there's
run.
no plan.
And she is unsure of how her parents have given her no independence, quite believe that they would allow her this much independence. And she calls them, and it becomes very clear to her that they are kind of a bit washing their hands. They're like the vibe is totally, well, you're his problem now. And
Right.
she feels that, and I felt that. Like, it was such a sad, but a necessary moment for her growth. And so I wanted to talk to you or ask you about her relationship with her parents, and particularly her mom. How did the mom's character grow and change over the course of writing and editing this book?
So the mom, so Everly's mother, has had a attempted suicide, and she struggled with depression, and she's one of those awful stories that we've heard over the years of a 1950s woman being sent for shock therapy, and she's had it all. So she's Everly is very much in tune with her mother's moods, and she fears doing anything to send her kind of tipped back down into a downward spiral. And I
Feels very
think
responsible. Feels
she
very
feels very responsible to keep her happy and keep her boosted up. Yeah. So I think a lot of the decisions she's made in her life have been thus far to keep her mom happy. The foremost being finding a fiance and getting married. I mean, her mother's happiness is hinging on this wedding and who's coming and what the dress is going to look like. And this pressure just lives on Everly. I think she and her mother are very close. I think that she sees her mother as a victim in a lot of ways. She knows her mother is unhappy. I think she blames the father in a little bit until she kind of gets some clarity later from him. But I think in the writing, she always had a mental health issue. So that was always there because I always wanted her to be a little bit of a poor little rich girl, Everly.
Mhm.
I wanted her to be a girl that had everything but didn't have
What
anything,
she needed.
right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, she didn't have a mother who was really there for her in the way she wanted. So over time, what I made the mother, she changed because I think I made her more sympathetic in the end. I think in the end, when Everly goes home to kind of for this come to Jesus moment with her parents, her mother really takes her side and kind of advocates for her to the father in a way that wasn't there in the beginning. And I think that
I
was
I didn't think she thought her mother was capable of. As a reader, I didn't like, it was
yeah.
a really moving moment because I thought, "Oh, this she's not going to be able to be she's not gonna be capable of helping her daughter the way her daughter needs to be helped."
And I think you're right because I think when I was writing it, you know how your characters sometimes surprise you?
Mhm.
I think she did surprise me when I got there. I think that I just realized instinctively that like the mom had more to her. I think I don't know about you, but when I write really fast, bad drafts, like bad. Like the dialogue, if you read my first draft, you'd be like, ooh, but I just don't care because I know I'm going to go back in and I'm going to fix it all. I just got to kind of get it out. And I think for a while, the mother character was a little one dimensional. Because she was somebody who I knew had this problem and I wanted the problem to affect Everly, but I had to kind of work on who she was a little more. So in the writing and in the revision, that's I think what came out more. It was just the leaning on this wedding, the
Right,
leaning on needing, the fiance for the mother's own self-worth. That was something that came out in revision.
right.
Um, yeah.
Yeah,
I
it was
don't
a
know. I
really
also find that I do drafts based on characters. So I'll do like a mother draft where I just go back into all the scenes with the mother and then just work on that. And then do like a Roland draft where I'm just focusing on Roland. I don't know if you do that, Molly, but I find that really helpful when I'm working on character arcs.
I don't, and that sounds time intensive.
I mean,
That sounds
it is,
hard.
but like, when you get to the end and you just gotta do the last
Yeah.
push, that's kind of when I do it.
So I was reading your author note, and it
Yeah.
sounds like you were alluding to the fact that maybe you got a new editor, like, halfway through the process of this book?
Yes, I got 2 new editors.
Oh my god. I mean, that's a nightmare. That can be a nightmare, but it sounds like it can.
No, I panicked when my beloved Kate Dresser, who acquired Summer Darlings and acquired this book, left, I was just like pulling my hair out because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like I loved working with her. I feel like she really got the book. So I was really nervous. And then I was assigned a new editor, and she turned out to be amazing. I mean, she was young, so I thought, oh, yikes, like does she know what she's doing? She totally knew what she was doing. And I say in my comments, like, she was an unexpected gift, because she really was. What she did is she said, you need to cut 10,000 words from this book, and it needs to be tighter. I think it was turned in like 20,000 more or something. And I had already cut it down. And I was thinking to myself, how can I do that? But it was the smartest thing I ever did, because the plot is so much tighter. I
Mhm.
combine chapters into one chapter. You're just forced to reckon with, what do you really need? There's so much that I don't know about you and the other writers listening, but there's so much that you end up putting in a book just as you're drafting, that when you really sit back and you're in the nitty gritty of, like, with the scalpel, like cutting, you really can get rid of stuff. Like, I really did not think I'd be able to cut that many words, and I could. And the book read so much better.
Yeah.
So I was so grateful for her for doing that. And then as we kind of got to the end of the editing process, she announced she was leaving. So now I have a new editor who also is really lovely, but she's just kind of helping shepherd the book out now. So
That's still a lot.
it's
That's
a lot, and
quite
I
a
feel
bit.
like it's the way of the publishing. It's just the way the industry is right now, right? I mean, I don't know if you've experienced it, but I have a lot of friends who the same thing, it's happened to them, and you just kind of have to,
Yeah.
you know, hope that the next editor works.
Um, I will say that the cutting of words and one of the things I always say about my editor is that she makes every scene, it's like it's an arrow. Right? So I'll write a scene and it's like flabby and it goes 20 different places and all like all those 20 places are very important. And she just like trims it all down. So it's an arrow, like it just fires. It just
Yes.
beginning to end. And I try to, when I'm writing now, think of that and internalize that. But it's an editorial thing. It is not a drafting thing.
Yeah, no, it is. It totally is. And I've also found, like, now that I'm working on a third book, right? We all learn, this is like why we write, to keep learning how to write and write better.
Mhm.
But what I noticed about my first book is I definitely would have way more dialogue than I needed. And I think with this book, one of the things I realized, even just from being a reader who reads constantly, is sometimes you can just sum it up in two sentences and then get into the point of the dialogue that matters, right? But I think new writers, that's something we struggle with, is how to find that balance between the internal monologue and the dialogue and the action and the plot, right? Like, we're always
Mhm.
balancing that. And for me, I don't know, I love dialogue. So my first book, I definitely went on and on in the dialogue and had to, rein it in myself before I even got published. But then even after I found an editor, I feel like I had to do more of that too. Because I think sometimes it's easy to lean on dialogue, to
Yeah.
convey.
And dialogue should, like, I mean, you think about the books that you're reading, that you read, that you're like, the dialogue is so sharp, so
Yeah.
focused. Like it just, you're almost giddy reading it. And whether it's banter, like if it's a whole scene of dialogue or it's 4 lines of dialogue at the very end of a scene. Yeah, it is full for sure. Not
Yeah.
easy. Not
No.
easy. So what is the third? Are you working on a new book just as you get into
Yes,
release?
I'm done with my draft. I'm pretty much done with my draft to send to my agent. I've had my 4 beta readers read it, so that's good. I know it's not, it's readable, as we all panic as writers when we write something new, even on a third book, right? I'm like, is this thing working? I have no idea. Um,
Can you tell us anything about it?
yeah, I mean, it's also set in East Hampton. I sort of feel like I've like come home. So my first book was on Martha's Vineyard, which is one of my favorite summer places to visit. I vacation there every single year. But I grew up on Eastern Long Island, and when I wrote on Gin Lane, I feel like I just really connected to a deep piece of who I am somehow, right? Even
Yes,
though, like I
powerful.
said, this isn't totally my world. I enjoyed. I really felt like I wanted to stay there for the next book. So this one is also a little bit. It's about a local two friends. It's like your book is about 2 nursing friends, so mine is about 2 summer friends, and one is wealthy and one is a local.
Mhm.
And it's about these 2 pivotal summers in their lives, and how, the past kind of informed the present, moment. And there's kind of a secret that they keep for
Yeah, there
10
is.
years. And yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that good stuff.
What is even a book without a secret? I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, the secret is the best part. And figuring out the details of the secret as a writer is the best fun, right? Like the most fun.
It is the most fun. And when the secret can have like 2 twists,
Yes.
it
Yes.
makes it all worthwhile.
Yes.
Brooke, thank you so much. I said this would be like a 30-minute interview. Here we are at 40 minutes. I appreciate you stopping by to chat with me. Everybody out there, grab this book. It's out at the end of May on Gin
Yep.
Lane.
May 31st.
Pre-order it right now. Request it from your library. Do all the things. Make sure you get your hands on this book. Everybody out there, stay safe, have a drink, read a book. Thanks again, Brooke.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Molly.